The Northern Star cut through the icy Arctic waters, its crew focused on the daily grind of deep-sea fishing. Captain Daniel Holt, a seasoned sailor with decades at sea, scanned the horizon, his instincts sharp from years of navigating unpredictable waters. But what he saw next made him freeze. "Port side, something's in the water," shouted deckhand Jake Mendoza, pointing frantically. At first, it looked like a drifting log, but as the ship drew closer, a shocking sight unfolded. A massive brown bear struggling against the relentless waves. Its thick fur was waterlogged, its movements sluggish. It was clear the bear was drowning. "How the hell did it get all the way out here?" murmured crewman Evan Carter. The crew exchanged bewildered glances. Polar bears were known swimmers, but this wasn't a polar bear. It was a brown bear, an animal that belonged on solid ground, not miles away from any visible land. The bear thrashed weakly, its energy draining fast. Every second counted. "Captain, if we don't act now, it's not going to make it," Jake urged. Captain Holt made a snap decision. "Get the nets. We're bringing it in." The crew leapt into action, scrambling for ropes, nets, and anything sturdy enough to help. But saving a full-grown bear from the sea was a rescue mission unlike any they'd ever attempted, and none of them were prepared for what would happen next. The Arctic waves tossed the Northern Star as the crew scrambled to save the drowning bear. Every second counted. The animal's movements were growing weaker, its head dipping dangerously below the surface. Jake Mendoza tightened his grip on a thick rope, his hands slick with seawater. "We need to get closer," he shouted over the crashing waves. Captain Daniel Holt adjusted the ship's position with careful precision. "Easy now," he murmured, eyes locked on the bear. One wrong move, and they could injure the animal, or worse, capsize their vessel in the effort. The crew unfurled a heavy-duty fishing net, their only hope of guiding the exhausted bear toward safety. With steady hands, Jake cast it into the water, aiming just ahead of the struggling animal. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with an almost instinctive desperation, the bear clawed at the net, entangling itself in the thick weave. "We got it!" Evan Carter yelled, but the fight wasn't over. The bear, panicked and confused, thrashed wildly, sending seawater spraying across the deck. The ship rocked under the force of the animal's struggle. The crew held tight, their muscles straining as they worked together to keep the net steady. "Easy, big guy," Jake murmured, trying to soothe the animal, even though he wasn't sure it could hear him over the roaring sea. Slowly, inch by inch, they pulled the bear toward the ship's lowered platform. Its limbs trembled with exhaustion, but it clung to the net, trusting the only lifeline it had left. Finally, with a last desperate heave, the sailors lifted the bear out of the freezing water and onto the deck. The massive creature collapsed, chest rising and falling in deep, labored breaths. It was alive. But as the crew backed away cautiously, one question loomed over them. What do you do when you have a half-ton wild bear on board a fishing boat? The massive bear lay sprawled across the deck, water streaming from its thick fur. Its chest rose and fell in deep, shuddering breaths. No one spoke. No one moved. The crew of the Northern Star stood frozen, gripping whatever they could for balance. Captain Daniel Holt was the first to break the silence. "Everyone, back up, slowly." The sailors retreated cautiously, giving the bear space. No one knew how it would react now that it was out of the water. Would it lash out in fear? Try to escape? Jake Mendoza whispered, "What do we do now?" Captain Holt exhaled sharply. "We figure out how to get it off this boat without anyone getting mauled." The bear shifted slightly, letting out a low, exhausted groan. It was alive, but barely. The cold water had sapped its strength. If it had any fight left in it, now was not the time. Evan Carter grabbed a bucket and filled it with fresh water. "It's dehydrated," he said, setting the bucket down a few feet from the bear and stepping back. "Maybe it'll drink." The crew watched in stunned silence as the bear's dark eyes flickered open. It sniffed the air, then, slowly, dragged itself toward the bucket. Its pink tongue flicked out, lapping at the water. A murmur of disbelief rippled through the sailors. "Did it just?" Jake started. "Yeah," Evan confirmed. "It knows we helped." The bear drank deeply, then slumped back down, its strength still drained. But something had shifted. The raw panic was gone. Captain Holt radioed for help. "This is Northern Star. We've got a situation." A long silence followed before the radio crackled back. "Did you say a bear?" "We rescued a drowning bear. Repeat, a bear. We need guidance on how to handle this." The sailors exchanged looks. "Yeah, no one was going to believe this." "Affirmative," Holt replied. "What do we do?" The response was both reassuring and alarming. "Wildlife authorities will send a team, but you're hours from shore. Keep it calm. Do not provoke it." Jake let out a dry laugh. "Yeah, because provoking an 800-pound bear was totally in the plan." As the crew settled in for a long wait, an unspoken question lingered in the salty air. What if the bear recovered its strength before help arrived? Would it remain as calm as it was now? Jake Mendoza leaned against the railing, eyeing the bear warily. Captain Daniel Holt ran a hand through his graying beard. Evan Carter shook his head. Or would instinct take over? The Arctic wind howled around the Northern Star as the crew stood watch over their unexpected passenger. The massive bear, still weak from exhaustion, remained curled up on the deck, its wet fur steaming in the cold air. It had stopped trembling, but no one could predict what would happen once it fully regained its strength. "So, anyone got a plan for getting a wild bear off our boat?" "Wildlife authorities are hours away. We need to keep it calm until they get here." "Yeah, but what if it doesn't stay calm? We are stuck on a boat in the middle of nowhere with an animal that could tear us apart." A tense silence settled over the crew. The bear stirred. Everyone froze. It lifted its head, nostrils flaring as it took in its surroundings. Then, to everyone's shock, it stood up. A ripple of unease passed through the sailors. The bear wasn't aggressive, but it was big. Really big. Jake swallowed hard. Captain?" Holt held up a hand, signaling everyone to stay still. No sudden movements. The bear turned its head slowly, locking eyes with the crew. There was no fear, no panic, just silent curiosity. Then, to their disbelief, it gave a slow shake of its wet fur, sending seawater flying. Evan exhaled. "It's acting like a giant dog." Jake chuckled nervously. "Yeah, a dog that could eat us whole." The sailors watched as the bear sniffed the deck, then padded toward the ship's railing. Was it? It placed its massive paws on the edge and stared out at the endless ocean. Looking for land? Captain, did it understand that it was lost? Holt grabbed the radio. "Any updates on that rescue team?" The response crackled through. "They're en route, but it'll be another 2 hours. Can you contain the bear?" Holt glanced at the sailors, then at the bear, standing freely, untethered, unpredictable. "Contain it?" He sighed. "Not exactly. The situation was stable for now. But if the bear decided it wanted to move around, or worse, panic, things could spiral fast." The crew had saved the bear's life, but had they just trapped themselves in a floating cage with a wild predator? And with no land in sight, would the bear ever make it home? The bear paced the deck of the Northern Star, its massive paws thudding against the damp wood. The crew stood frozen, watching its every move. It wasn't acting aggressively, but it also wasn't leaving anytime soon. Captain Holt kept his voice calm. "Nobody make sudden movements. We need to stay predictable." Jake Mendoza, gripping a railing for support, muttered, "Right. Predictable. Because standing on a fishing boat with a giant bear is totally normal." The bear sniffed the air, its nose twitching. Then, to everyone's surprise, it let out a low, rumbling huff. Not a growl, but something softer, almost curious. Evan Carter, ever the risk-taker, hesitated for only a second before picking up another bucket of water. "Think it's still thirsty?" Captain Holt shot him a look, but Evan carefully slid the bucket forward. The bear stared at it, then at Evan. The crew held their breath, and then it drank. Slowly, the bear lapped up the water, showing no signs of fear or aggression. It was as if it had accepted their presence. Jake let out a shaky laugh. "You telling me this bear knows we saved it?" No one could say for sure, but something about the way it watched them, the way it moved without hostility, felt almost grateful. The realization sent a ripple of awe through the crew. They had feared this animal, and yet here it was, calmly drinking from a bucket they'd offered. Then another surprise. The bear lowered itself to the deck and, with a deep sigh, settled down. It was resting. Captain Holt exhaled. "Well, I'll be damned." The sailors, still cautious, exchanged glances. This wasn't just a wild animal anymore. It was a living creature that had chosen to trust them. The radio crackled to life. "Rescue team is 30 minutes out. What's your status?" Holt smirked, watching as the bear peacefully closed its eyes. "Situation's under control. But, you're going to want to see this for yourselves." The crew chuckled softly, the weight of their fear lifting just a little. But, as they neared land, one question still remained. How would the bear react when it was time to say goodbye? The Northern Star neared the coastline as the rescue team's vessel came into view. The crew stood at the railing, watching as the bear, now dry and noticeably stronger, sat calmly on the deck. It had been hours since they'd pulled it from the freezing ocean, and yet, instead of fear, there was something else in the air. Reluctance. Jake Mendoza nudged Captain Holt. "What if it doesn't want to leave?" The captain sighed, rubbing his temples. "It's a wild animal, Jake. It belongs out there." But the thought lingered. The bear had trusted them, even rested among them. Would it understand that this was for its own good? The rescue team's boat pulled alongside them. A wildlife officer named Sarah Lawson shouted up, "We heard a crazy story. Looks like it's true." "You have no idea," Evan Carter called back. The plan was simple. Use a small, low-motorized raft to guide the bear toward shore, where a team of wildlife experts would monitor its reintegration. Simple in theory. In practice, no one had ever done this before. The crew prepared the ramp leading down to the raft. But the bear remained still, watching them with quiet curiosity. Sarah gestured carefully. "We'll need to encourage it, but gently. No sudden moves." Evan took a deep breath and stepped forward. "All right, big guy," he murmured. "Time to go home." The bear lifted its head. It didn't look afraid. It didn't even look hesitant. It simply stared. And then, as if it understood, the bear rose to its full height, stretched, and, without any resistance, ambled toward the waiting raft. The sailors exchanged stunned looks. Jake exhaled. "No way. It gets what's happening." The bear stepped onto the raft, its weight shifting the small vessel. Sarah's team quickly secured it and began their slow journey toward shore. The sailors watched in silence, the weight of the moment settling over them. Then, just as the raft pulled away, the bear turned back. For a brief moment, it locked eyes with the crew. And then, it let out a deep, rumbling huff, a sound of acknowledgement, a farewell. Evan swallowed hard. Did it just say goodbye? No one had an answer. But as the raft glided toward land, the Northern Star's crew stood in quiet awe, forever changed by the impossible, unforgettable rescue of a bear who should have never been there in the first place. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, one thing was certain. None of them would ever forget the day they saved a drowning bear.